We're live. Hello and welcome to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. I'm Brandon Tessers. I'm a licensed therapist, but this is not therapy for very, very many reasons. It is just an open conversation. I'm here for the next hour, as I am every week or almost every week, talking with you all. I will be talking about whatever I start by talking about, because that's where, it's just me here right now. But I'm doing my best to make my guesses about who you are and what you're interested in and how I'm coming across to you, how I'm impacting you. For those of you who are willing and able to participate in the chat, I appreciate that because it gives me more information on which to base those guesses about who you are and what you're interested in and so on. I do my best to read out chat comments as they come in because we're streaming on different platforms simultaneously, and each of you will only see the comments coming from other viewers on your platform. So if you're on Twitch, you'll see the other Twitch comments, and I try and read them all out so that we're all on the same page across the different sites. I work with a private therapy practice called Effective Artistry. Our office is located in Northbrook, Illinois. We do individual, couples, family, and group therapy with people in the states of Illinois and Wisconsin. We also work with a few coaches who can work with people all over the world via the internet. Those coaches are all trained as executive functioning coaches and have additional specialties as well: parenting coaching, business and professional coaching. Excuse me. I feel like I'm missing something. Yeah, this is just an open conversation. We'll go where we'll go. One of the pieces of advice I got from someone before I started doing this was to just talk. Originally, I had some thought of making it like an open office hour where I'm here and I'm doing my work and doing whatever. And if somebody wants to chat or ask questions or whatever, they can show up and ask things, and then I'll chat. And someone suggested that that's a very intimidating and difficult thing to, come across, or maybe even confusing, right? You come across a stream and see somebody like not paying attention and doing some other work or whatever. It's hard to ask a question. It feels like disrupting someone or whatever. So it's just like any conversation. Humans, the whole way that we work is that the things that we notice, the things we're conscious of, pay attention to, aware of, whatever, impact what we think and what we feel and what we do next. So in a conversation, I'm paying attention to the person I'm talking to, and the things they think or the things they do impacts what I think and feel and do next, including what I say next. And then the things that I do that they observe impact what they think and feel and do, including say next. We go where we go. And I'd rather be talking about whatever you want to talk about. So don't worry if I'm talking about some other topic and you want to ask about something or change the subject. Don't worry about keeping it on what I'm already talking about. You just don't hesitate at all. It's, as with many things, there's enough inherent barrier in place to take action. We don't need any additional stuff, right? Like, you already have to just have some level of awareness of certain things and access to equipment and the right context or environment to even be able to be here in the first place, much less to then come up with something that you want to ask and get yourself to put something out there on the internet, even if it is under, your username that may not be personally connected to you or whatever. It's hard enough as it is. We don't want any additional, like, well, I don't know if Brandon wants to talk about this right now, or I don't want to distract. None of that. There's no distractions. There's no rabbit holes. We go where we go. But I start by talking about just whatever comes up. And today / recently / right now, I don't know. This hasn't been what I've been thinking about like all day today, but it is what I'm thinking about right now and leading up to right before starting the stream, and has been coming up, well, at least recently, is that we have bodies. It's like such a silly way to say it. Humans, all right, there's a concept in philosophy called dualism, the idea that we consist of at least two things, right? And this is an inherent experience that humans have. It's inherent to the experience of being a human, is that we know, because in order to know anything, there has to be the ability to know stuff. That I think, therefore I am, right? That we observe things, we experience, are aware of things. Whatever way you want to talk about it in specific, there is some awareness, consciousness. There's a me, right? That I notice things, I feel things, I think things, I decide things, whatever. Uh, and then there's the body, which is part of me, right? If we were to ask anybody, like, is your body you? Most people would say, no, my body is not me completely, but like certainly my body is part of me. Uh, the reason that we all inherently, well, one of the reasons that all humans kind of inherently have this understanding of at least two different aspects of ourselves, versions of ourselves, is that your mind, which is what we're going to call the conscious thinking part of you, right? Not your brain. The brain is part of the body. That's an organ like the heart or anything else. Your mind is what we're going to be calling that element of you, that aspect or component of you that thinks and feels, notices things, has observations, experiences, ideas, desires, whatever. And then the body, the mind and the body. There are things that the mind is aware of that don't involve the body at all, right? We can imagine things, we can predict the future or remember the past or create something whole cloth that we know to be fictional, none of which have anything to do with what our body is experiencing because they're not real in here. And vice versa, our body does things, is involved with things that don't involve our mind at all. We all go to sleep every day, more or less, pretty much every day. We all go to sleep, and our mind ceases to exist, or if you're not comfortable with that way of talking about it, shuts down or goes into a different mode or whatever. But we're not conscious. That's kind of by definition what it means to be unconscious, is that we are not consciously aware of things. That you fall asleep and the next thing you know, time has passed and you didn't notice anything during that time passing the way that you would if you were awake. The body still exists during that time, but we kind of tap out, right? Or put it a different way, eventually people die and the body still exists. It's there, right? We call it a corpse now, but the body's still there. But the mind, the conscious, or as people will often have referred to it in the past as a soul or a spirit or an animus or whatever different terminology applied to the same idea, that the body is a physical thing which exists in an observable way. And then there's some other thing which kind of animates and gives life to that body. We know these things are not the same thing because you can have one without the other. At least we know for a fact that you can have the body without the animating spirit, whatever, of the body. That's what happens after death on the observable end. And then, of course, different people all throughout history including today, have all kinds of different thoughts and theories about the other side of it. What would it be to have a mind without a body connected to it? Talk about that as the afterlife, or out-of-body experiences, astral projection, whatever. So we all know this. If we don't think about it in these terms, even if someone were to ask you, like, do you have any awareness of there being two elements? If they say no, which people often will, it's just a matter of communication. There's something about the way that you're framing that and the way that they're interpreting it. Everybody knows that, like, your body is still around. Again, even if you're not consciously thinking about it, we all know that your body still exists while you're asleep, even though you're not conscious of anything. Now, me, I, and I don't mean literally me, I, Brandon, I mean like that idea, the I that each of us, when any of us says I, whatever, the I that we are referring to, the ego in Freudian terms, the self, the observer self, according to some. What we're talking about 95% of the time when we're talking about that, we're talking about the mind, our conscious experience. That's the me. My body is part of me, but there's a reason I talk about it as my body. We all do, right? Like, my body is sending me a signal, or to show appreciation for your body, or to take care of your body. We're talking about it as a thing that you possess, because the thing that is the me is the thing that observes and has thoughts and feelings and dreams and ideas, right? That's just the nature of what this is. If there's some aspect of us which is conscious, that's the conscious part. And so when we're thinking about us, we're thinking about it that's a conscious thought. Now, we, to varying degrees, and we can track this by context, right? Take any person and put them in certain context, they're going to be much more aware of their body than in a different context. Or we can track this by individuals, that take one person and let me say that differently. That we can track this by context, meaning take one person, put them in different contexts, and in different ones they'll be more aware of their body, and other they'll be less aware of their body. Or we can track it by individual, where put a bunch of different people in the same context. Some of them will be more aware of their bodies, and some will be less in that specific context. So there's variables both external to us and internal to us that determine the extent to which we are aware of having a body. And that is something that, like, as time goes on, as technology progresses, society grows, I want to be clear that obviously this is not a one-to-one every single person's experience, but statistically, on the trend level, as time progresses, we solve more broad human problems. That as opposed to our far distant ancestors, we have much more food security. We know where we're going to get our food from. We don't have to spend significant periods of our time, significant portions of our day, our life, actively looking to find food. Again, obviously, is that every single person's experience? No. And some given individual could end up with, in fact, every single moment, there's some person or some number of people who are less secure in where their food is coming from than they were a day ago. But on the broad strokes, the trends of history, we have more safety, more security, more comfort, more convenience, and that continues to increase as time goes on. So we evolved in this way by whatever mechanism, we evolved in the context in which the body's needs were very high priority, urgent, that you didn't have the opportunity ever to just become somebody who sits around and thinks all day long. Because if you weren't actively looking for food, you starve to death relatively quickly, right? Any person, no matter how anxious you are or depressed or any other thing, those are things which occur in the mind. If there is a hungry predator staring you in the face, you are not aware of those things. Those things might still be true, depending on what we mean by anxiety, depressed, whatever. It might still be true that your nervous system or your body or whatever is functioning in a particular way, but we are not paying attention to that when there's a more urgent physical problem. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? That at the base level, all humans, they're universal, like you need food and water. If you have that, that doesn't mean that you're like done. I have food and water now. I no longer care about changing anything else. Like, it just means that base level is taken care of, and now I can worry about like safety and security, which is a more abstract concept. Food, water, shelter, whatever is an immediate need. And then, like, will I be safe tonight only matters if you are confident that you will still be alive tonight. And only if you've got that, like, you're not done now. Like, oh, I'm safe. I will stop thinking and just shut down as a person. You just move on to the next thing and identifies that as social belonging or, social status or whatever, and so on and so forth. The idea here is not, as with all of these psychological concepts or philosophical constructs or whatever that are useful, they're attempts to label our observed experience of reality, not to dictate what we expect reality to be. Maslow's looking at what people do, what people experience, and then labeling it in a way that makes it easier to conceptualize and understand. We got to take care of the most. If you're about to die, whatever thing is causing that problem is top priority. If you do not address that thing, nothing else matters. Does that mean that nothing else is important to you in any way? No, it just means that none of it's going to matter if you die. So that's the first thing we focus on. Well, we address problems as they come up. You can't solve a problem that doesn't exist and that you're unaware of, right? So problem happens, we solve it. Hungry predators chasing me, I get away. But then when we have some free resources, some time, some space to be able to build systems, to do things now, spend resources now on something that is theoretically going to benefit me in the future, especially perpetually through the future, right? Like I can run away from every predator that comes, or if I spend resources building a wall, a house, a building that no predator can get into, well, I'm investing resources in building that building, even though there is not a predator here right now. So it's not doing anything for me in this moment. I have to invest resources in it anyway. But then when I do that, it now prevents me from having to run away from predators whatever number of times I otherwise would have, because I have a safe, secure space I can be in. So we invest things up front. That's what systems building is. You both in designing the system and in building it, you're spending resources and it doesn't do anything for you at first. It's meant to solve some problem which isn't currently happening. So we get a little bit of breathing space and then we solve another problem, right? If I'm constantly running from predators, I can't build something. But if I get a break from running from a predator, I can maybe build a house. Now I don't have to run from predators anymore, which freed up a bunch of resources that I was using on running from predators now is available to me because I built a system that solved those problems preemptively. And I can use that freed up resources to do something else. So change happens in this kind of exponential way, right? That's true for an individual and it's true for a community, including a community as broad as the entire human species. Well, we solve the problems that are there. When you're starving, you find a way to get food. And then when you're not starving, you work on how do I make it so that I won't starve again in the future. We develop agriculture or whatever various different techniques. As we continue to grow, and I'm talking historically, as the human species grew, expanded, more of us were on the earth at any given moment, and as community and communication, especially intergroup communication, continued to grow, and there's more cross culturation, and instead of somebody having to start from scratch, right? Like if I've never seen anyone or heard of anyone or experienced someone using like a sharp rock to cut or stab something, then it would be pretty hard for me to come up with the idea of like fastening that to the end of a long stick to be able to do it at a distance, right? I can't invent a spear without knowing that a rock can be used to cut or stab. Well, if we're all isolated, every person basically is inventing everything from scratch. It's pretty slow and redundant. We're all redoing each other's work. Each group is developing its own stuff. And there's going to be a lot of convergent innovation where each different group comes to some version of something because it's inherently like the optimal way or sometimes even the only way to solve a universal problem. But once we start to communicate, then, well, I can take the innovations of somebody else and build on it. And obviously the earliest versions of that is intergenerational, that my parents or other ancestors have developed something and passed it on to me. And now I can start with what they've passed on to me and refine it from there, including even language, right? Theoretically, someplace, sometime was the first proto-human that used verbal sounds in a way that we would identify as language. And then that spreads. And then the next generation can add a few more different sounds to interpret a little bit more nuance and so on. We are still to this day constantly inventing new words. I just referenced Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That is a phrase, a piece of language that was developed less than 100 years ago, like in the 20th century. I'm talking to you on a computer. We're streaming. Like these are not concepts in language that existed before. So we continue to refine these things. And so as we become more cross-cultural contamination, we learn from each other and build on it. Now, obviously, again, it's not a one-to-one, but that's always the thing that happened. There's plenty of examples, and very, very high profile and very, very large scale examples of cross-cultural contamination resulting in one culture subjecting the other culture in some unfair way. I don't want to downplay it. I'm trying to use not neutral language, but I'm trying to use language that's broad enough to encapsulate many different specific examples. But certainly colonialism, slavery, right? These are pretty intense, like very, very heightened examples of inequality that results from two different groups of people interacting with each other in some way. I mean, hard to get more unequal than one group killing the other group, genocide or whatever. I don't know why I'm getting so caught up in being very specific about that. Point is that over time we continue to solve the problems that exist, and as we do that, we get more of an ability. Like there are people in the world now who can dedicate their entire career, their entire, 60 plus years of productive life, 80 years, however much, to a specific single niche issue, right? Like there's a man who developed a very specific version of a way to play Magic the Gathering called, at the time, Elder Dragon Highlander. That's now called Commander. It's like very popular. There are people who spend their lives focused on building a stream. Mr. Beast makes videos. That's the focus of his life, right? This isn't to dismiss those things. I think those things are entirely valid, even if they're not something that I personally am invested in. That doesn't mean that it doesn't mean something to people, that it isn't a worthwhile thing to do because it has an impact that is worthwhile to have. It's just to say that we have gotten to a point as a species where we've solved so many of the baseline problems. Like if you at any point in your life have encountered a hungry predator in a scenario in which you were vulnerable to that predator, then that is a wild story that you could tell and probably have told over and over and over again over the course of your life, because nobody has that experience anymore. Right? My family, I myself still have told the story of the one time that my wife's grandmother was in northern Wisconsin in the woods and walking from one building to another carrying a ham, and then a black bear appeared in the woods in front of her, and she just slowly set the ham down and just backed away, because that's so unusual, right? That's how far we've gotten in solving that problem. Are there downsides? Certainly. Are there costs that have been paid? Is it a trade worth making? Those are valid questions, but it doesn't change the fact that that problem has largely been solved. That frees us up to focus on other things. And what that means is, over the course of if in the context of, I don't know where my food is coming from, I don't have shelter from, or the ability to predict weather patterns, I don't have the ability to predict or protect myself from predators in some continuous way, right? I have to be on active watch. If in that context, we still were thinking, which we were, and thinking is part of what helped us to come up with things that made it so that we could solve those problems in more efficient or longer lasting ways. We evolved, obviously, to be very highly incentivized to think, to use cognition, because otherwise, in those scenarios, running from a hungry predator is not something that cognition is going to help you with. As any athlete will tell you these days, or just really any person, when you're doing something physically that you have all the information you need, all the ability, all the experience, the muscle memory, whatever, to do it, actively thinking, consciously thinking while you're doing it disrupts your ability to do it successfully. So running from a hungry predator is not something that thinking about concepts and abstract ideas and whatever is generally helpful for. Are there specific exceptions where, being able to recognize, if I get to this place, that'll get me to safety? Sure. But by and large. So we're constructed in a way in which we are very highly incentivized to use cognition. Otherwise, we never would have done it in the first place. Well, now we're living in a life where, for the most part, your problems and my problems, again, for the most part, are not physical in nature, right? Especially those of us here in this stream right now, we're obviously, for one reason or another, more focused on problems that occur in the mind, the way that people feel, the way that people think. And yes, that impacts what we do, and what we do impacts what we're experiencing. But in terms of physical danger, it's pretty rare. I'm talking on a, I find myself being very careful because I'm anticipating like what people's responses could be, right? If I were to say like we're not really dealing with physical danger, well, obviously there are lots of people who are, and every single person, maybe not literally every single person, but pretty much every single person has had at least instances in their life in which they were in physical danger or were physically harmed. Now, for the most part, again, those things are things that we have like infrastructure in place and systems and communities in place to help. Like I got into a bike accident riding my bike in the city of Chicago 13 years ago and flipped over my handlebars and landed on the ground head first and was knocked unconscious. The first thing I remember after that, as I was coming to, is I heard myself saying, I clearly had been speaking before I became conscious, because as I became conscious, aware, I heard myself saying, call Susan Preston, which is the name of my, at the time, girlfriend, now wife. Was telling the people who were helping me, because people were helping me. Somebody saw me flip over and stopped their car and came over. Other people, like 3 or 4 people, came over. One of those people took my bike because there was a bike shop literally just like across the street, and they just, one of them called 911 right away. One of them took my bike over to the bike shop, and the bike shop agreed to like hold on to my bike until I was ready to come pick it up or whatever. And then someone was helping me to sit up, and someone had already, because I was saying call Susan Preston, somebody said we already did, so somebody had heard what I said and got my phone and called. And then an ambulance showed up and they put me in it and took me to a hospital. And like, so even in those cases in which we're in physical danger, the infrastructure we have in place, the other people that are around, and these are random strangers, right? Like I very much appreciate what they did. Didn't get any of their contact information or know anything about them, couldn't pick them out of a lineup. I was, not in a place to be forming very solid and crisp memories when I was interacting with them. None of them like followed me to the hospital, or did they need to or should have. Just random people, right? And there is a baseline level of humans caring for other humans that I'm not going to claim that there are no exceptions to this, but very rare exceptions, I suppose. Otherwise, almost universally, you're walking down the street and you see someone fall down in pain and you're going to try and help, or at least consider how you could help. Maybe if it's a particularly dangerous situation, you're not rushing into danger to save somebody, but somebody falls down bleeding, you'll call 911. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make, without being dismissive of the fact that yes, people do experience physical danger and physical harm, and some people even experience those things in a repetitive way, like over and over again, consistently. These things do exist. By and large, we mostly are not spending most of our time dealing with physical problems of a physical nature about that would damage our bodies or that require some physically active response to. I mean, literally, we now, as a culture, are at a point where we collectively talk about how like working out is important to be healthy. Does everyone do it? No, but you're going to have a hard time finding anybody who would say like, yeah, it's not important to work out or be active or exercise in some way. Meaning like we've constructed lives that operate so differently from the lives in which our ancestors, like our physical bodies and our systems, including our cognitive systems, evolved. Our current lives are so different from that our bodies don't do super well with this life. We have to consciously and deliberately set aside some resources, some time and some energy in the day to in some way kind of simulate or a very controlled and limited version of like what it would have been like to have to use your body constantly in order to survive. If we don't put effort into that, it just doesn't happen. It is possible for people to live lives where they barely move. Is it healthy? No. Ideal? No. Whatever. But it is possible now for a person to live a life where they literally barely move off of a particular couch or toilet or whatever. So what does that mean? Well, we're highly incentivized to use cognition. We used it even when we needed to be using our body to navigate physical danger or difficult environmental circumstances all the time. Now we've mostly resolved those things. People are thinking over time. As each problem has been solved, we think more, we think more, we think more. And there's a lot of upside to that. And there's a lot of downside to that. And one of the issues with humans is that we are finite, we're limited. That's not a problem in and of itself. Well, it's not possible to be different. So it's not a bad thing. Does it cause problems? Sure, right? Like if we were not finite, no human would die, right? We'd be able to accomplish or do anything. But it's how we are. And we have to do what we can, both in terms of consciously the way we think and what we do intentionally, but also the way that we're structured physically, and this very important third thing of non-conscious cognition, which is a whole thing. Can't stay but dropping by to say hi. Hello. Glad to be with you for however long you're here. Oh yeah, we have these non-conscious cognitive processes. This is the thing everybody, like Freud was trying to figure out when he talked about the subconscious. There's lots of different ways of talking about it, but there's two things we observe that everybody's aware of, like we started at the beginning. There's your body, your physical form that interacts with the actual real world. There's your mind that you're aware of but doesn't have any actual interaction with the external world in any way. Everyone's aware of those because you observe them. Then there's this third thing that you not only don't observe, but you can't observe, but we have to speculate about. And whatever version of it you want to talk about, it's the thing which interfaces between the mind and the body, right? The mind, if I decide to give a thumbs up and then I do, like I had a conscious thought to give a thumbs up, my body did this thing. We know enough about science to know that like what's happening is that there are electrical signals being sent to very specific muscles, instructing those muscles, not necessarily instructing sounds abstract, causing those muscles to contract or to expand, relax to very specific degrees. And many different muscles are working in concert to do this. So somehow a conscious thought of I'm going to give a thumbs up, then gets translated into some set of instructions or some set of stimuli or something that results in a physical thing. And we have no clue what that is. And most people aren't even aware that it exists because you can't observe it. Everyone knows about their own conscious awareness because that's conscious of it. Everyone is at least at times conscious of their body, so they're aware of that. You don't necessarily have to ever be aware of this in-between thing. It requires some speculation. It exists only in theory because otherwise there's not a way to explain like how a conscious intention then results in physical, biological processes taking place, right? These days, to be clear, most of the time, again, different people use different things different ways, but most of the time when someone is talking about my brain makes me do this or my brain wants that or whatever, mostly what they're talking about is this third thing where they're like, it's not my conscious intention, it's not my body just doing a thing. There's something like, had I paid closer attention or consciously considered that, I wouldn't have done it that way. Or I wouldn't consciously choose to be as aware of this particular thing that I don't think is useful to be aware of, and it just makes me feel anxious or whatever. But it's not the body making us aware of that, and it's also not consciousness making us aware of that. What is it? So this is part of why everyone's talking about the brain these days, because we're more aware of this collectively now than we used to be because we're thinking more. Anyway, one of the things that happens as a result of the fact that we're finite is that we simplify because we have to. In fact, literally cognition, anything that you think, anything, any component element of cognition is a simplified abstract representation of something. You cannot take in all the specific detail of anything. I can't look at this pen and be aware of every specific detail involved in this pen. Even if I could, my awareness of those details is not the same as the actual real thing that it itself is. It's some representation of it. So even if it accurately had like information about it, it doesn't have the mass that this has. It doesn't have the volume. It doesn't take up the space. So it's dropping things, simplifying. So we look for simple things, and that's great. But as as we are aware, we talk all the time these days about things like cognitive biases or heuristics or logical fallacies or whatever, which what we're talking about is that sometimes that causes problems, right? When I walk up to a door that's either a push or a pull in my life, I'm certain that at some point when I was young, first observing those doors, that I must have paid some conscious attention to them and how they work. But I have no recollection of that. And over the course of my life, since I can remember, I've not approached a door and had conscious awareness of thinking and evaluating, is this a door that I push on or a door that I pull on? But there are some processes in place that take in data and result in, without me having any conscious thought, when I approach the door, I push it or I pull it. If we investigate it, as I'm pointing this out, and we consciously think about it, then we can identify some things of well, if it's got a bar across the front, then that's usually something that you push. Where if it's got one of those big rectangle, I don't even know, handle, I guess you'd call it, that's probably a pull. And 99% of the time, when I've gone through a door like that, whatever I've done as I approach it, whether push it or pull it, has worked. And then every once in a while, because we oversimplify, sometimes a door is installed with a bar on the outside, even though it's a pull, and I go to push it and it doesn't work. And when we get it wrong, that calls our attention. So we're all more likely to be familiar with or aware of the times where we pushed a door that was meant to be pulled open or pulled a door that was meant to be pushed. My point is that even something as simple as that requires simplification, and that's useful. It's much better over the course of my life to just not have to pay any conscious attention, spend resources evaluating whether to pull or push a door, having processes in place that just kind of non-consciously determine the action, even though that leaves those things vulnerable and to making mistakes, that I sometimes then take action which doesn't accomplish what I'm trying to accomplish. Sometimes I even take action that accomplishes the opposite of what I'm trying to accomplish. I'm pushing a door closed or locking it or whatever when I'm trying to open it. Again, these are inherent vulnerabilities to the way that cognition works. So when I'm saying that cognition has its upsides and its downsides, it's the same as existence has its upsides and downsides. I don't mean that it's some good and some bad. I mean that just the structure of how it operates, there are limitations involved, there are vulnerabilities involved. Well, one of those things is that we're conscious. We have a bias to being conscious of the things that we are conscious of. Meaning, if I am already aware of something, in any given moment, if I were to try and ask, we could predict, this person, in this next moment, they could be aware of any one of these 100 things. Which of these things are most likely to be something that they will be aware of in the next moment? By far, the most likely thing is the thing that they are aware of in the previous moment. Do we always, what I'm thinking of, what I'm aware of now, is what I'm aware of next moment? No, we shift. But the majority of, if you broke our lives down into a series of moments, the majority of those moments, we're continuing to be aware of what we were aware of in the previous moment. This is a lot of what cognitive biases are. We act as though the information that we have is the relevant information, and we act as though the information we don't have is not relevant. That is necessary. If we didn't do it that way, we would never take action at all, because you can never know what information you don't have. That's the whole point. You don't have the information, so you don't know what it is or how relevant or important it might be. If we're nope, I can't take action until I am certain that there is no information that would be relevant that I do not possess, then we can never take action. So we move as though what we already know is what's important to know. One of the things that means is that we pay attention to what we pay attention to, which always includes consciousness, right? If we're paying attention to our thoughts, and we think that thoughts are worth paying attention to. Long way of talking about the specifics and the mechanisms of getting around to we think collectively, we think so much more than we used to. Over time, we put more and more and more emphasis onto cognition. And this, saying it that way, people might not be 100%, but the concept is not controversial or debated in any way. Do we collectively as a species, not each individual, not even each individual community or whatever, but do we collectively as a species put more emphasis on academic education than we did 300 years ago? Like, yes, obviously we do. Do we put more emphasis collectively as a species on information altogether than we used to? Yes, obviously we do. I mean, because of the internet, if nothing else, there's very clear that there's an entire realm where information matters and physicality doesn't, right? Like what my body is shaped like, what my body's abilities are, what my body is feeling doesn't really impact. Like if I write something, you can read it regardless of any of that other stuff. There's some real upsides to that. Obviously, we wouldn't be doing it if there weren't. Now, we are also doing it in part because there are upsides to here's a good example is that sugar is something that everyone I think would acknowledge. We collectively as a species are very highly incentivized to eat sugar. When we eat sugar, it's a pleasurable experience. Again, not every single time or in any quantity or whatever, but sweet is a taste that we like, right? Universally unlearned, maybe not universally, but nigh universally and unlearned. Our unconditioned response is like there's a reason that kids want to eat sweet stuff. It's just an inherent response. Can you learn? Can you be shaped to respond to that? It's like, oh, I don't like that genuinely. Yes. And can you learn to love like bitter tastes? Yes, we can shape ourselves to do these things over time. But the unconditioned initial response, humans like sweet, sugar. There's reason for that. Sugar is an important thing. In fact, again, way oversimplifying, but glucose, sugar is like the primary fuel source for cognition. Different systems in the body use different chemicals and different processes, and cognition uses glucose. So we're highly incentivized as a species historically to get it so that we can use cognition. And the culture, not the culture, the environment, the context in which we were evolving, that our far ancestors lived, sugar was not readily accessible. It was relatively difficult to come by. So we're highly incentivized for it. Same with fat. Fat, again, way oversimplification, but like the brain is composed largely of fat. And we are a species who has optimized our survival strategies around prioritizing like brain size and nervous system usage. So we're incentivized. That's why fat, cream, whatever tends to taste good to us. Now we live in a context in which, for most of us, sugar is readily available. You can get as much as you want of it at any given time. So our incentive structures are out of balance, right? If it takes 10 hours to get a bit of sugar, then to get that bit of sugar, we have to be very highly incentivized to get it. Well, as we do that, and as time progresses, we then are incentivized to find ways to make it so that we can get more sugar because we're willing to spend that many resources on it, right? We're now at a point where if I dedicated 10 hours to getting sugar, I could have, I don't know how many thousands of grams of sugar in my system, right? So the body, this is part of what we're talking about. The body changes very slowly. By and large, my body, your body is pretty much the same as people who lived 100,000 years ago. Human beings, Homo sapiens, that lived 100,000 years ago. Some distinctions, but for the most part, pretty much the same. My mind is completely alien to them, and theirs would be completely alien to me. I have no ability to actually, I can conceptualize something about what their reality theoretically was in some way. No ability to actually conceive of or understand it in any depth. And like if we took someone from that didn't know about fire and tried to introduce them to this life, like it would be completely incomprehensible. And vice versa, put me in their situation and I wouldn't know what the hell, I would die very immediately. Unless, there were a bunch of other people there from that place that knew what they were doing and helped me out. And even then, bodies change very slowly. Cognition changes very quickly, right? I can be ecstatic in one moment. I can be imagining flying through the air on the top of a dragon or whatever, and then the next moment I can be absolutely devastated imagining like my own imminent death or whatever. Cognition can change completely, complete 180s in a split moment. Your body, it changes, but in very small ways. An individual person's body changes in very small ways that take a long time, whether that's intentional change, like, working out to develop certain muscle groups or whatever, or unintentional change, like your hair growing or, your skin losing elasticity as you age or whatever. It's obviously useful to have these two things working in tandem with one another. But you hear people talking about this all the time in different terms. I know I'm being potentially long-winded about this, but I think it's useful, if not actually, I think important, to put a lot of this context around it so that we can have conversations about things that everybody's noticing, everybody recognizes as being relevant or important or worth consideration, but is being misidentified by almost everyone because we're not laying the groundwork here, like I've been trying to do in this conversation. That everyone will talk about people being so distracted by their phones or isolated from other humans, or every generation has referred to the next generation behind them as lazy for thousands, literally thousands of years, being less aware of or attentive to their body, or, caring about things that they shouldn't care about, right? Kids these days, everybody's so obsessed with their mental health. And, when I was a kid, whatever. Yeah, we think more and more because the physical problems of our life are mostly resolved. They get more and more resolved as time goes on. And we get highly incentivized, not just in the inherent way, but by the structures around us. You send somebody to school, like, in fact, if I were to ask anybody in our culture, like, do you think it is a bad thing to try and get people to be more aware of information, to be more, educated, to learn, be smarter? Like, nobody would say that. Everyone would be like, yeah, no, it's very important to be educated and to learn to understand the world around you and to be able to access information. Nobody would say that, like, it's better to not be able to read than to be able to read. I don't know what the disease situation would be. I assume if we went back to prehistoric time, we'd kill anyone helping us pretty quickly with all our diseases. Yeah, potentially. I don't know. Honestly, I wonder about how much of that is. This is not. I want to be clear. This is not my field at all. This, like, you know, uh, virology or whatever, the study of like germs, bacteria, and viruses. So I couldn't say, but I do wonder to what extent that idea is overblown for us culturally because of the way that it serves certain narratives. Like, you know, I'm not going to say every single person, but like there's a general awareness of like when European colonizers or explorers or whatever came to the New World, North America, Central, South America, that many people from North and Central and South America died because they were exposed to viruses and bacteria carried by those Europeans that the Europeans had developed an immunity to and that they had not been exposed to and developed an immunity to. Uh, I don't know anything to say that that's not accurate, but I do know to say that it is the role that that plays in our cultural understanding of what happened in the colonization of the Americas is overblown for sure. For example, this is not, I don't even know how, this doesn't seem relevant at all, but it's interesting information to me, I think. And I do like to point these things out, partly because having better information helps people to come to better conclusions, but in large part just to, this sounds crappy, but in large part to just decrease everyone's confidence in the information that they have. I think it is better for people generally to act as though the information that they have is potentially useful, but not act as though the information that they have is 100% true. It incentivizes us to be more curious and more open to new and additional information, to be able to correct and improve things more quickly. But my understanding, and not my field, my understanding is that right before colonists got to the Americas, there was a massive plague, something on the level of the Black Plague in Europe, wiping out 30+% of the population. And that quite a bit of the reason that smaller groups were able to take over such large, like in the same way that I have been told that Jared Diamond is pretty controversial in related academic circles. Yes, Jared Diamond, the author of Guns, Germs, and Steel, which is a relatively well-known book, nonfiction book about, colonization. I don't know that I haven't read the book, so I couldn't say. I don't know that the book refers to it that way, but certainly, like the idea that it's, the Europeans had better technology is what allowed them. Like, it is true that Europeans had access to like gunpowder, whereas indigenous people in the Americas did not. That does not allow a group of 100 people to take on a group of 10 million people, right? Like, even if it's an advantage, it is not that much of an advantage. And so that's like an initial myth, right? Is that the Europeans were more technologically advanced, but that doesn't quite hold up. And as you get a little older and you need new myths to supplement, it's like, well, actually, it was really more about like they spread diseases. They brought new. It wasn't anything they intentionally did. They just carried diseases that wiped out the indigenous population, and that doesn't quite totally hold up either. And my understanding is that the truth is really a lot more about like, how to phrase it, populations having been devastated. Like if people from the Americas had arrived in Europe in the wake of the bubonic plague, it would have been relatively easy for them to conquer Europe because the society was in shambles. You can't lose a third of your population and come out of that strong. But also B, that like we tend to deal with people as monoliths. So in this particular example, we tend to group indigenous Americans into like large, like all one, or breaking it into three. But like generally, again, not everybody, but generally when people are thinking about indigenous Americans at the time of colonization, they're not really thinking about specific differences between the Sioux and the Paiute and the Shoshone and whatever. Like we kind of collectively just lumped that all together, the rule of that empire. And when the Europeans came along, it was an opportunity to be like, yep, you guys help us out and we'll overthrow. We've just been waiting for some opportunity to come along that we can overthrow things. Basically, I think this is a comment about Guns, Germs, and Steel. Basically, it's about the question of why did colonization work? If I remember right, he attributes the success to geographic advantages in Europe, but he doesn't really consider that most of Europe was a technological backwater for many centuries. I would say that that's an ongoing project in Western civilization, Western culture, is to explain, call it colonization, call it Western hegemony, call it Western dominance of other cultures, whatever, to explain it in some way that involves like European superiority, that there was some advantage. And there's variations on that. There's stuff that's very much on the like, just we're glazing white colonizers and talking about like, yeah, they had the light of Christ and that's what enabled them to, or a book that came out relatively recently that was and still is very popular, Sapiens, came out like 10 years-ish ago, between 10 and 15 years ago, that is putting forward the idea that like Europeans were more scientifically minded and more curious about the world, and that's why there's levels to this. But for the most part, when you're talking about stuff that has been written by Westerners or is popular in Western culture, like if you look into the academics where it's not like popular books that lots of people have heard about, you can find a lot more grounded, I guess, realistic, whatever, nuanced, I don't know. But the large scale stuff tends to serve the narrative of like, yeah, Europeans had some sort of advantage and that's why, as opposed to concepts like that they just showed up at the right place at the right time, or concepts that like Europeans were much more willing to just lie and say that they would do something and then change their mind later, or Since when were Europeans more curious? Well, the scientific revolution took place in Europe, don't you know? Yes, obviously, right? But there's layers to this too, because it's not all bad faith stuff, right? That it is true that the like the scientific ontology, I want to say, but I feel like that word doesn't work right. That the way in which we think about what is true and what is false is shaped by our culture. That's true for all people, right? And we are products of a culture that is this specific culture, and thinks of, identifying what is true and what is false, or what is useful and what is not, what is good and what is bad in certain particular ways. And a lot of that is stuff that we attribute to or conceptualize through the framework of like the modern scientific method, what, the result of what generally is called the scientific revolution, of the versions of science and curiosity and whatever that emerged in Europe in the, like, I don't know, maybe starting in the 16th, but mostly like 17th century. So that means things like, for example, if you were studying archaeology in the 1990s, the bulk of the literature, the resources, the evidence that you had to look at was stuff that had been done by other European archaeologists. So like we just still have to this day, although the gap is smaller than it used to be, have way more archaeological evidence from things that happened in Europe than we do of things, if we're talking about through the lens of what we would in modern Western culture consider to be archaeological evidence. We have way more of that about, like you could go in your backyard and explore. If you're an archaeologist educated in Germany, it's a lot easier for you to explore German sites than to explore Chinese sites, right? And yes, obviously, I mean, we can point at all kinds of specific examples that even most Westerners understand and know. Algebra was invented in the Middle East, right? Or gunpowder was invented in China. There's examples that even in popular knowledge we can attribute to others. But yeah, even people working in good faith, trying very hard to understand how certain things work. Well, when they go to look at the body of evidence, you pop on JSTOR or whatever, and you're like, let me look at all the academic articles. The bulk of those academic articles, because of the nature of the way in which you are accessing them and the database that they are part of and what is required in order to become a part of that database, the bulk of that is done by other people who are European or North American, and therefore there's much more work done in those areas. So for a long time, for many decades, there was just like, we have all kinds of evidence of X, Y, and Z from Europe, and even to the point that like the first time we saw the oldest example we have of X from Europe, we consider to be the first example in the world of X. And then later it's like, oh no, actually there's examples of that in, like, I don't know, the Sudan or whatever from 100,000 years earlier than that. So this is how these things like stack on each other, right? Like it makes sense for an individual who's like, I think it's important to pay attention, like, ooh, archaeology, this is a good idea. And I wouldn't argue with that, neither would you or most people, that like it's probably, at least to some extent, useful to pay attention to what has happened in the past and to try and gather physical evidence to draw conclusions about. That makes sense. I'm on board for that. And if you're the person who's like first starting to do that, and it's not like there's just unlimited resources available to you, but there is that castle up on the hill over there, you can go over there and explore and whatever, you get more information. And then the next person coming up who's interested in, like, people who've heard of you are more likely to want to be interested in the same exploration and the same method of doing it. And then they do that stuff and they come to their conclusions. And then the people who come later are trying to write things and learn things, and they're referencing all that text, and it snowballs. It's really hard to change, which isn't to say that it's not a problem. It's just that one of the things that we tend to do as people, one of the simplifications we use, is this idea of like good and bad, that, someone who is coming to false conclusions about European superiority must be doing so in some nefarious way, or motivated by nefarious ideas, when it can be just as bad of a conclusion and have just as bad, I mean, the impact it has is the impact it has. It can cause just as many problems, and also be true that the person was acting in good faith and trying and doing things that are very understandable of why they would come to those conclusions. To me, I think it's too easy for us to just write somebody or something off as like, well, that person's a jerk, or that person didn't care, or that person was acting in bad faith. Not that those things don't happen, they do. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't recognize it as a way of letting people off the hook. I'm saying that it's, I believe, more important to pay attention to what happens than to be able to identify it as, well, that only happened because somebody was bad in some way. Because nobody thinks that they're bad. And so then we think, well, I'm not acting in bad faith like that person was. And then you fall victim to the same mistakes, rather than being able to recognize that people can be good and act in good faith and have good motivations and still do things that have bad consequences, which again is that a comfortable thought? No, because it means you got to like think about all kinds of stuff that you wouldn't otherwise want to think about. And thinking about those things might help you to make fewer of those mistakes. Anyway, the point I was originally trying to get at, and I got to wrap up now here in a few minutes. So I'm just trying to, I like the way the conversation's going, but I want to put this out there in case anybody is that if you were to take a specific individual human from, over the course of their life and look, how much attention do they pay to things which exist in their cognitive experience, in their mind, their thoughts and their feelings? And how much do they pay attention to their physical experience and things which exist in the physical context? That if you were to pluck some human from 100,000 years ago, the percentage that they're paying attention to the physical versus the cognitive is going to be a lot higher than if you were to pluck somebody from right now. Again, individual variation and whatever, but like over time, if we were to take a statistically average individual from a given time, we're paying a lot more attention to the things that we think. And there's a lot of benefit to that. We develop things, we come to conclusions, we predict and solve things, and it's awesome. There's a lot of downside to it. But anyway, the point I was trying to get at originally was that we are all collectively recognizing that like we are way in our heads. I myself as an individual am way in my head. We as a society, kids these days, those people over there are just like so focused on their thoughts. Sometimes we think it's really good to be very focused on your thoughts, like, oh, this person is very considerate and they have very strong values. And other times we think it's terrible for someone to be focused on their thoughts, like that person is very self-absorbed, or that person is even psychotic, right? Which, at least in one way of talking about it, we could think that person is paying so much attention to their own thoughts that they're mistaking those thoughts for reality in cases of delusion or hallucination. Yeah, I think when you're starting from the position of these city-states in Europe seem to dominate the rest of the world, why? It's really easy to be biased. Yeah, well, especially because there's some objective evidence, right? Like in terms of colonial empire. But if you're starting from the position of like, well, anybody would want to do that, then you have to explain why this group of people was able to do it when others weren't. And so you're kind of skipping past the possibility that like that's not actually an inherent thing that a person or a group of people would want or attempt to do. And if that's not a thing that a person or a group of people would want or attempt to do, then it's entirely possible that they wouldn't consider that somebody else would be attempting to do that, right? This is discussed with Indigenous Americans in North America quite a bit, that like in the early days that many of them did not have, there are no like monolithic, it's not none of them, but many of those cultures did not have concepts of individual property rights. And so when people are coming over and saying like, yeah, we're going to buy this from you, it's like, they don't even know what you're talking about, right? Anyway, which even saying that is likely to be interpreted through the lens of some deficiency, like, well, it's their lack of knowledge, as opposed to like, no, they have a particular worldview and these people have a particular worldview that resulted in these people taking things from these people feeling justified in taking those things or whatever. There are a lot of different attempts these days, and it seems to me that maybe I'm projecting or biased. Certainly, there's always echo chambers and whatever, but it seems to me that there's growing numbers and intensities of attempts for people to bring attention to the fact that we have bodies, that we're not just a collection of thoughts and feelings walking around, that your body impacts you. Even things like the body keeps the score and the way that people talk about trauma as being embodied over the past 10 years, like regardless of the veracity of the concept, the fact that it is being discussed to the extent that it is and the ways in which it is being discussed and utilized, to me is evidence that like it's useful to people to be like, oh, right, you have a body, and what your body impacts your experience too, not just your thoughts. I object to having a body. It's a nuisance. That is a very, very common thought, especially among the people that I work with. And it's kind of kind of evidence of what I'm talking about, like, especially with how sick I was feeling last night. Me too. I was also sick last night and it sucked. But like, isn't it interesting? The body should calm down. It should have calmed down. If my body would just do what I told it to do, then I would be happy, is what we all think. And then, of course, there are all kinds of things that we intentionally do. And then only later we're like, oh, that was completely wrong. That did not help me at all. I've told the story before about my son when he was like 4, trying to jump down from like a 2-foot height and like this. And after a while, he's like, Dad, I'm trying to like land full flat on my face and stomach on the floor, but my body won't let me. It's like, yeah, there's reasons that your body interferes in the way that it does. Is it always good? No. People talk about how everyone cares so much about their feelings these days. I'm talking about, there are people who complain that everyone these days cares too much about their feelings. Your feelings aren't so, everyone's a special snowflake and whatever. And these are all different ways of trying, as far as I can determine, these are all different ways of trying to get at some things that are true, but the different specific ways at which you try to get to it and the conclusions you draw on what to do or what should be done are very different, and some of which are much more helpful and some of which are very harmful. But they can't be easily dismissed, because there is some awareness on some level that like, I pay so much attention, not just like as compared to my genetic ancestors, but even like compared to me 20 years ago. I think I'm in cognition more. I'm paying more attention to my thoughts and feelings and communications and ideas with others, and therefore, correspondingly pay less attention to my physical body and the physical environment around me. Oh, I meant to ask you about a thing related to that maybe next time. Yeah, I look forward to it. Actually, I should get going. Anyways, that's the thing I was trying to bring up, is that to some extent, to me, this is part of why people are so terrified of AI, is because AI, even in the like rosiest scenario for AI supporters, like the most somebody who thinks that AI is and will be like capable of anything and everything, even then, at most, we're still talking about the ability to replicate the way that humans manage information, take in, utilize, and communicate information. No body, right? Which is important, right? Direct sensory experience of your environment, internal biological drives, right? Having a body matters. And even if something could think exactly the way that you could think, if it didn't have a body, well, if we were to say, as sometimes is proposed, imagine we downloaded your consciousness into a computer. Is that you? Is that superior to you? Right? Like, certainly there's advantages in that you don't get sick or whatever, but certainly there are disadvantages, wouldn't it? You ask people, imagine like being conscious, but completely paralyzed, not just paraplegic or quadriplegic, but like, as far as the external world is concerned, you are in a coma, completely non-responsive, but you are conscious the entire time. Doesn't that sound like a nightmare to you? Not being able to have access to your body, and through your body, the physical environment. Anyway, surely we can artificially simulate a body that can tell me not to belly flop on the floor, but also doesn't get sick. Well, perhaps we can, and we will probably find out at some point, humans as a species. Good to be with you. I'm sorry to transition abruptly, but I'm running late for my next thing. I will be back next week, same time, 1 to 2 p.m. Central Time on Monday. Be well. Thank you. Goodbye.